Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to be looking at the Portuguese unique naval unit, the Caravel. In particular, we're going to focus on whether or not it's completely overshadowed by the discounted and extra strong Portuguese galley line, or to what degree it manages to carve out its own role. Some players like this unit and think it's quite good, while others find it underwhelming. So let's investigate further. To start with the historical inspiration they're based on, caravels were fittingly made famous by the Portuguese, particularly during the exploration along the coast of Africa, though the Spanish also built similar ships, with notably two of Christopher Columbus's boats being caravels. They were particularly fast and agile as their main advantage, making them well suited for long voyages, though were also used as armed escorts for merchant ships on occasion. Their main defining feature was being significantly smaller and lighter than the galleons during the same time period, so we'll start by seeing how well some of those elements are captured in AoE2. It turns out the faster part doesn't translate, as they have the same speed as the galley line, but do pay homage to the lighter aspect, with the galley line having more attack and HP. It may seem strange, but the Caravel is then actually the more expensive of the two by 10 gold, keeping in mind both these costs reflect the Portuguese gold discount and extra ship HP. One point in the Caravel's favor though is it doesn't require a Castle Age upgrade, whereas it's 230 food and 100 gold to unlock war galleys. And another little hidden benefit for Caravels is they train over 40% faster. That at least gives an immediate use case of helping jump back onto water if you're rebuilding your docks and need a fleet as quickly as possible. An obvious problem for the unit though is the Portuguese galley line is already so good, being discounted, having extra HP, and a unique tech for +1/+1 armor, that it's just tempting to stick with that. If anything, looking into the more hidden stats makes the case for the Caravel even more difficult. Ships have a lot of bonus damage shenanigans below deck, and just looking at their 8 and 9 pierce attack, we'd expect them to do 1 and 2 damage respectively against war galleys with 7 pierce armor. Instead, the Caravel in Castle Age with all upgrades is dealing 7 damage to a war galley, while your own war galleys are dealing 11 damage, despite having nearly all of their attacks seemingly blocked by pierce armor. That's because the Caravel has 6 anti-ship and the war galley has 9 anti-ship hidden attack. Even worse, if we have them both attack a Castle Age fire ship, the war galley does 5 damage and the Caravel does just 1 damage per shot. That's because the fire galley resists 6 anti-ship bonus damage. So against the two most common Castle Age ships, the Caravel so far is objectively hitting less hard while costing more. The offsetting factor then is its pass-through damage, which like all things in AoE2 is a little more complicated than it first appears. Like a Scorpion, the Caravel's bolt passes through its target, dealing half damage to anything it hits in front or behind. What's interesting is how much that behavior changes depending on the distance that it's aiming. Castle Age Caravels have 8 maximum range, but here I have them targeting units at different distances, 2, 5, and 8 tiles away, noting that the number of units hit varies from just the target to then 2 units past the target to then 4 units past the target, potentially reaching up to 12 tiles away from the Caravel's location. This reveals something interesting about the bolt, which is that it fires starting from above the ground and its angle matters. With units up close, it's essentially falling straight down, while aiming far away allows the bolt to travel significantly beyond the alleged maximum range of the unit. In fact, its displayed range just refers to how far a targeted unit can be, not how far the bolt can travel. Against other ranged units, that means you can potentially have quite a few units hit with secondary damage, even well outside your usual reach, whereas you get very little pass-through damage against things that come in close. Its lower attack compared to the war galley then maybe isn't as important as it first seemed, and the question is then how many ships you have to hit in order for its worst stats to be fully offset. It turns out against war galleys at least, even hitting just 1 extra unit with pass-through damage is enough to balance the total output at least. It is more spread out, which is less ideal from a focus firing perspective, but it's starting to give some hope that the Caravel's ability might justify its cost in some cases, especially if you could consistently start hitting 3 or 4 ships per shot. A last note is all the same upgrades affect both, namely archer attack upgrades, chemistry, ballistics, and dock techs, though Portuguese lacks shipwright. The galleon upgrade in Imperial Age then gives a little more value though, with the same overall attack boost against ships, similar HP increase, +1 range, and more armor, all for a lower cost. They started with better stats in Castle Age and improved more with a cheaper upgrade to boot. So any way you slice it, the galleon is looking like the value play. So with the galleon ending up with more HP, 4 more bonus damage against ships, and a lower cost, with everything else around range, attack rate, speed, hitbox, etc. being identical, let's see how Caravels actually hold up in some different situations. First off, as a surprise to no one, the galley line beats the Caravel one-on-one, with a galleon taking roughly 50% more shots before it goes down. In this case, I'm using a Portuguese galleon with the extra armor unique tech on both sides, but it's basically the same result against a generic one as well. It's then a very similar story at first as we scale up, with galleons easily winning 5-on-5 or 10 vs 10, though this may not be the best way to really test caravels, as ships just attack moved into each other from outside their range will tend to set themselves up like this in a straight line, essentially negating the caravel's pass-through ability. If instead we restart 10 vs 10, but I purposefully patrol the units to stack them up, even on this relatively small scale, the caravels will then win. Now this might seem like an exaggerated example, as you could argue no one would intentionally bunch up this much against caravels, but it's actually pretty common for players to hide their galley line numbers and keep them together by patrolling in a tight space. Usually that leads to better engagements, as you can get all of your ships to stack on top of each other and automatically start focus firing, but in this case plays perfectly into the caravel's hands. As another example, 20 vs 20, ambushing a stacked up group of galleons, it's still a close fight and not the cleanest engagement, but the caravels come out ahead. And if you retreated early into the fight, it would have been a lot of free damage without much taken in return. On the flip side, 20 vs 20 in a line formation would be a loss. So more than most naval units, it really matters not just how you are using your ships, but also how your opponent is using theirs, which I think contributes to the polarized opinion around caravels. I should also note microing against caravels is also generally not as effective as usual, as micro tends to regroup and have units overlap more often, if anything, which again just increases the amount of pass-through damage you're taking, with this here as an exaggerated example. You might assume as we get into larger scale battles, say 40 vs 40, the caravel would automatically start to win, but that's not necessarily true. Here, 40 vs 40 in a lined up fight, the galleons actually win, and it's only if we start to restrict the battlefield with a bit of a choke point that caravels gain the upper hand, so how open the map is should probably influence your leaning toward galleons or caravels. The main takeaway is despite all the galley line's apparent advantages in stats, bonus damage, and cost, there are various realistic cases where caravels can take a great engagement. But what about other naval matchups, keeping in mind the differences in bonus damage, etc.? Fire ships are always a common unit line to run into, and remember in Castle Age, caravels were doing just 1 damage compared to the War Galley's 5. In Imperial Age, things improved slightly, and against a non-fast fire ship, they do 5 versus 9 damage, so still clearly outgunned by the galleon with a similar ratio against fast fire ships as well. Still, maybe the pass-through damage can save the day again. In this case, not so much. Galleons with double the fast fire ships' numbers out in the open trade pretty much evenly, and we could improve this result with hit and run micro for the galleons to give the fire ships some pathing trouble, but it's clearly a better result than what we get with caravels, which despite some pass-through damage early, lose much faster and feel pretty anemic in contrast. Remember, when units get too close, you basically lose the effect of their pass-through damage entirely, while they're also just doing less damage per shot anyway. That is a big strike against them, as fire ships are obviously a very popular naval unit. As we expand our scope though, things actually get quite a bit better against demo ships. Caravels require more attacks than galleons to bring them down, but at least against a large number of demos, the pass-through damage helps out a lot, partly because they're almost never firing up close. Where galleons lose half their ships in a 40-on-20 battle in open water, the caravels are much more effective at picking them off, only taking a couple of big hits and losing 6 units in this example, which you can imagine would be even better in a choke point. While the edge against fire ships went to the galleon, caravels are low-key pretty good against a group of demos, in part because those units bunch up so closely together. So those are the main 3 ship types, but while we're here, we might as well take a look at the unique naval units as well, and how caravels hold up against their brethren. To start with the Thericidae, elite caravels do just 1 damage per shot due to its high ship armor, so caravels are clearly not going to do well, and with balanced resources, it's just a bad fight, no way around it. In this case, with the Thericidae taking out 30 ships without a single loss. Against turtle ships, on the other hand, elite caravels actually do the same damage per shot as galleons, since turtles fully block both of their anti-ship bonuses. It turns out both caravels and galleons are at a slight disadvantage fighting it out with balanced resources, though if anything, there's maybe a slight edge for caravels over galleons, but it's not a huge difference. Obviously, fire ships would be the best counter either way. Finally though, we have the longboat. Now longboats are very interesting here, as they have a quirk of packing unusually close together. Here, for example, we have 40 galleons in line formation and 40 elite longboats, showing how bunched up they like to get by default. Naturally, this makes them easy pickings for caravels, and considering how popular Vikings are on water maps as a nearly automatic shoe-in for team games, is maybe the best use case for caravels that we've seen. So to circle around to the beginning question of whether caravels are useless, I think it's pretty clear that they're not, though they're also not strictly better than the galley line, especially the Portuguese and usually strong war galley and galleon. Individually, caravels may look considerably weaker, and especially against fire ships are very ineffective without question. But if you're able to catch an opponent packing their ships tightly together, whether it be through patrolling, micro, a choke point, or just the natural behavior of longboats, the pass-through damage easily overcomes their weaker looking stats. You can't go wrong with the Portuguese galleons in pretty much any situation, but against micro nerds on water or the Vikings, the caravel really pays to keep in mind. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.